In the age of Pharaohs, the boy king's golden tomb. When the golden eyes of a child's sovereign see through the veil of time, what fragment of yourself will survive the gaze? They said the boy king's tomb would remain silent forever, yet here you are pulled across centuries as though the sands themselves conspired to summon you. Corridors glow with a light that is neither natural nor artificial, a shimmer that breathes with memory, carrying whispers of a civilization erased from common history. You thought you would witness only gold and stone. Instead, the tomb watches you, bending your curiosity into revelation, your awe into dread. Every artifact, shadow, and echo of ritual folds into your consciousness like a fractal, recursive, unyielding, impossible to disentangle. The boy king does not sleep. He waits, his presence encoded in gold, pigment, and stone, challenging you to see beyond the life you thought you knew. The Chamber of Whispering Gold. The moment you step into the tomb, the air thickens with a presence you cannot name. Dust motes hang suspended, catching what little light penetrates the sealed corridors, and in their shimmer you sense echoes of a boy who ruled yet barely lived. This is no ordinary chamber, it is a nexus of perception deliberately designed to ensnare your awareness. Every surface hums faintly as if the stone itself carries memory, and the faintest touch sends ripples through consciousness you didn't realize were your own. The golden walls, intricate with patterns now centuries faded, are alive not with life, but with intention, coded sequences meant to shape thought before the mind can even recognize the intrusion. You pause before the sarcophagus. Its surface gleams with a light that seems to pulse with the boy king's heartbeat, or perhaps the heartbeat of the tomb itself. Scholars call it craftsmanship, the hidden library calls it instruction. The mask atop the coffin is more than a likeness of the child monarch. It is a mirror reflecting fragments of your identity you did not know were malleable. In its gold, you see not only your own face, but echoes of countless observers who came before you, all subtly altered by the tomb's presence. You understand in a quiet, creeping way that the tomb does not simply contain history. It contains cognition, and your mind is now part of its experiment. Hieroglyphs crawl along the walls, shifting imperceptibly as your focus falters. They are no longer merely symbols, but a lattice for perception, each curve and line designed to destabilize the linear flow of understanding. You feel the tug of Zeno's paradoxes in your chest, the impossibility of reaching certainty, of fully grasping what is unfolding before you. You are simultaneously in the chamber, outside it, and observing yourself observing it. Memory falters, sequences of events collapse into one another. A ritual once performed for divinity now operates on your mind alone, reducing cognition to raw, recursive awareness. Every object in this chamber exerts subtle pressure. A gilded chest emits a resonance you cannot hear but feel, vibrating through your very bones. A fragment of painted wood seems to shift as if aware of your gaze. The tomb does not merely present artifacts, it engages with thought itself. Modern psychology would call it suggestion, the brain filling gaps with narrative. Here it is an unavoidable interaction. Every attempt to interpret the tomb's symbols is itself absorbed, analyzed, and incorporated into its architecture of cognition. You begin to sense the boy king not as a corpse but as a principle, a persistent vector encoded in gold, shadow, and time. Time itself bends in the tomb. A corridor that should be finite stretches and loops back, overlapping with rooms you have not entered yet. This is observer effect realized. Your perception, your attention, your very awareness are variables in a system whose rules are older than recorded history. The golden mask reflects not only your face but possibilities, each decision you make, each thought you entertain, refracted infinitely across the corridors of memory and expectation. You recognize the recursive pattern. Your consciousness is being systematically unfolded, reshaped, and folded back upon itself, a structure imposed by a civilization that understood perception as a material to be molded. You reach a small alcove where a faded scroll lies alongside a ceremonial dagger. The scroll hints at knowledge forbidden to common understanding, methods to preserve identity while dissolving the certainty of self. Each glyph, each curve resonates with latent principles of awareness, functioning as a prism through which the tomb bends your cognition. Your heartbeat aligns with some invisible rhythm, a pulse embedded in gold and stone that you feel before you can recognize it consciously. Dissociative phenomena, cognitive illusions, recursive thought, they are not accidental here. They are the tools and architecture of the tomb's design. And yet the most disquieting realization is this. The tomb does not test, it does not punish, it does not reward. It exists, indifferent and eternal, and you are woven into its structure. Every breath, every thought, every fragment of awareness you possess is now part of the experiment, folding endlessly into the boy king's golden chamber. If the tomb has already rewritten the architecture of your mind, how will you ever know what is yours and what belongs to the boy king's eternity? The Hall of Eternal Echoes. As you move deeper into the tomb, the corridors narrow and the air becomes denser, filled with the residue of lives long past. Every footstep seems to awaken vibrations in the stone, subtle pulses that your body senses before your mind can process them. This is no mere architecture, it is an instrument calibrated across centuries to measure perception itself. Each wall, each relief, each gilded surface resonates with the echo of a civilization that understood consciousness as both malleable and eternal. The Boy King's brief reign has left an imprint far more enduring than any decree or edict. It is encoded into the very structure of the tomb. The flickering torchlight reveals carved scenes of ceremony and ritual, yet these images are unstable. A priest's arm shifts slightly, a hieroglyph seems to pulse in rhythm with your heartbeat, and the figures in the relief appear aware of your presence. The observer effect is alive here. The tomb anticipates perception, and in anticipating, it alters it. Modern studies, split-brain experiments, cognitive illusions offer pale shadows of this phenomenon, yet here it is a palpable force, bending both reality and your sense of self. The line between what is observed and what observes begins to dissolve. A small chamber opens, filled with shards of painted wood and fragments of gilded furniture. Each object hums with a residual presence, a memory encoded in its very material. The tomb does not merely contain the Boy King, it contains every life that touched him, every thought, every whispered incantation folded and layered into the corridors and chambers. You reach for a scarab amulet, and a subtle shiver courses through your consciousness, as if the artifact recognizes your curiosity and responds in kind. Perception here is recursive. Your attention shapes what is revealed, which in turn reshapes your attention. Time loses meaning, seconds stretch into eternities, and your memories intrude in ways both familiar and alien. You sense multiple threads of experience unfolding simultaneously, like parallel versions of yourself walking the tomb at once. The Boy King's presence is not simply symbolic, it is structural, embedded in the spatial temporal geometry of the chambers. You recall the Boltzmann brain hypothesis, the eerie notion of consciousness spontaneously arising from chaos, and a shiver of recognition hits. Perhaps the tomb itself is such a construct, and you are merely one fleeting instantiation of its observation. The golden mask appears in your periphery again, but it is different now. Its gaze is layered, not fixed on your physical form, but on the sequence of thoughts passing through your mind. You realize the tomb is not passive, it is active, an experiment in cognition spanning centuries. Your mind is measured, recorded, and altered even as you walk. Each reflective surface, each carved symbol, each interplay of shadow and light functions as a node in a network designed to fold perception into itself, fracturing certainty and constructing new layers of awareness. Even the faintest pulse in the walls seems intentional. The tomb has harnessed phenomena that modern neuroscience can only theorize: resonance, cognitive entrainment, recursive perception. Every artifact becomes a mirror, not for vanity, but for the mind's internal architecture. You begin to question your memory, your assumptions, the continuity of your identity. Dissociative patterns emerge, interweaving with cognitive dissonance, until the observer and the observed are inseparable. The Boy King does not simply await in death. He participates through every vector of perception, every moment of your engagement with the tomb. And yet, as you feel your awareness stretch across centuries and converge within the gold-laden corridors, a terrifying clarity emerges. The tomb does not guide, punish, or protect. It merely exists, indifferent, infinite, recursive. You are part of its system now, and the system is indifferent to the distinction between your mind and its own design. If your thoughts have already become instruments within the tomb's eternal experiment, what remains truly yours to claim as consciousness? The Chamber of Fractured Mirrors. The corridors open into a wider hall, but the space is deceptive. Every surface seems to reflect what is not there, casting shadows that betray impossible angles and suggesting presences beyond perception. You feel yourself being measured, not by rulers or scales, but by the architecture itself, which has learned to anticipate attention and curiosity. The Boy King's tomb is not merely a repository of artifacts. It is a lens focusing centuries of ritual, geometry, and intention into a single point: your mind. Each reflection is layered with echoes of observers past, patterns of thought left like fingerprints on the very air. A gilded mirror hangs at the far end, yet when you approach, it does not return your image but a shifting amalgam of faces, your own, distorted by the intrusion of ancient memory, and others who once lingered here, unaware they had left their consciousness behind. Modern cognitive psychology offers theories: false memory, observer bias, dissociation, but none capture the active, living recursion you feel. The mirror is not a passive object. It is an instrument of the tomb, a device to fragment and multiply perception until the observer cannot distinguish between self and history. Along the walls, murals pulse subtly, the pigment vibrating with a rhythm imperceptible to casual observation. They depict ceremonial processions, offerings, and the boy king's fleeting reign, yet each scene shifts as you study it. Priests' hands move, ceremonial objects rearrange themselves, and the hieroglyphs twist in ways that seem deliberate, intelligent. This is cognition encoded into matter, and the tomb's algorithm is patient, eternal, relentless. You feel a creeping comprehension. You are not exploring, you are participating in a ritual older than the sands, older than language, encoded into gold and pigment to manipulate thought itself. A cluster of artifacts sits in the center. A pectoral, a ceremonial dagger, fragments of papyrus inscribed with patterns that hint at esoteric formulas. These objects pulse in response to your focus. Each glance, each tentative step alters their arrangement in subtle ways. It is observer effect made tangible, a recursive loop in which your mind becomes both instrument and subject. The tomb does not merely contain the boy king. It contains the memory of all who attempted to perceive him, folding each consciousness into its design, creating a palimpsest of awareness spanning centuries. Time warps, seconds stretch and compress unpredictably, and memory intrudes in impossible ways. You recall moments from your life that never occurred, interleaved with events from history you could not have known. The tomb operates like a living split-brain experiment. One half of your mind walks forward in measured awe, the other dissolves into speculation, doubt, and recursive contemplation. Both are equally real, yet neither can dominate. Your perception is fragmented, stretched across dimensions both spatial and temporal. Even the faintest shimmer of gold seems to communicate directly with neural circuitry you cannot identify. Every artifact, every symbol, every reflection imposes a subtle influence, guiding thought, shaping attention, and bending awareness toward recursion. You feel a profound intimacy with the boy king, not as a child of flesh, but as a principle embedded into the geometry, the rituals, and the gold. Identity begins to bleed across the boundaries of observer and observed, memory and reality, presence and absence. And yet the most chilling understanding emerges. The tomb does not care whether you survive this awareness, whether your mind endures or collapses. It simply exists, eternal, recursive, infinite. You are now part of its system, as much a construct of its design as any artifact, reflection, or glyph. If the tomb has already entwined your consciousness with its eternal architecture, what remains of the mind that once thought itself independent? The labyrinth of golden resonance. The passage widens, yet every step feels like entering a new dimension. The walls shimmer with a metallic luminescence that shifts with your gaze, creating corridors that seem to fold in on themselves. You sense rather than see the tomb measuring you, your curiosity, your fear, your anticipation, translating them into a subtle rhythm that pulses beneath your skin. The boy king's tomb is no longer merely a resting place. It is a living labyrinth, a system of cognition that tests and fractures understanding at every turn. You feel the weight of centuries pressing against your awareness, as if the walls themselves remember every observer who has ever walked here. Gilded artifacts lie scattered with precise intention. A ceremonial pectoral studded with lapis and carnelian seems to vibrate when touched, though you feel no motion. A small golden figurine appears to shift its posture when your attention flickers. Modern experiments in perception, split-brain studies, observer effect, false memory pale in comparison. Here observation is both medium and message. The tomb anticipates thought, bending perception in ways that feel both intimate and invasive. You realize your mind is being mapped, folded, and refracted through gold and stone, leaving no cognitive pattern untouched. Hieroglyphs on the walls pulse subtly, their ink seemingly alive. Each symbol intertwines with the next, creating chains of perception impossible to parse in a single glance. You recall Zeno's paradoxes, the impossibility of traversing infinite halves, and suddenly they manifest spatially. Corridors divide endlessly, reflections multiply, and time seems to stretch, as if the tomb itself has extended the moments of your consciousness into eternity. The boy king does not simply rest in death. He persists in the very patterns that structure awareness within these walls. In a narrow alcove, fragments of papyrus cling to stone, illuminated by the faint glow of hidden channels. Their writing is partially eroded, yet the patterns of cognition remain intact. They describe techniques for manipulating awareness, paradoxes encoded in form, sequences designed to fracture linear thought, recursive instructions that loop the observer into observation. You feel the influence of every glyph, every curve, every line, as though the tomb has evolved into a mechanism that engages directly with consciousness, bypassing sensory input entirely. The golden mask reappears, not in its physical form but reflected across multiple surfaces at impossible angles. Its eyes seem to track the flow of your attention, your subtle shifts in focus, your internal hesitation. The tomb does not command you, it absorbs you. Every thought, every attempt to analyze, every moment of curiosity is integrated into its recursive lattice. You are becoming both participant and artifact, a mind folded into the patterns of ritual, gold, and geometry. Time fractures further. Moments interleave with memories that may not belong to you, fragments of rituals you never witnessed, voices you cannot place. The tomb functions like a living cognitive experiment, measuring how identity responds to recursive, layered perception. Each object you encounter exerts influence beyond comprehension. A scarab pulses in rhythm with your heartbeat, a dagger glints in alignment with your glance. Every reflection aligns with cognitive expectation while simultaneously subverting it. Awareness itself is the medium, and you are now indistinguishable from it. And yet the most disturbing truth asserts itself. The tomb does not judge, observe, or punish. It simply exists, eternal and recursive with or without comprehension. You are now inseparable from the architecture of golden resonance, a vector in the tomb's timeless experiment. If the tomb has already folded your consciousness into its eternal design, how will you ever discern the limits of your own mind from the patterns imposed upon it? The pulse of sunlit gold. The deeper you descend, the more the tomb asserts itself as a living presence, one whose essence vibrates not through sound or motion but through cognition itself. Gold glimmers in a rhythm imperceptible to the eye, a cadence that resonates faintly in the bones, in the spaces between heartbeats. It is a pulse older than memory, encoded into the tomb's geometry and objects, aligning with the observer's mind in a quiet, invasive resonance. You realize that each step you take, each glance you cast, is not merely motion but participation in an experiment older than dynasties, designed to unfold consciousness itself. A narrow corridor opens into a chamber filled with ceremonial artifacts. Jewelry, pectorals, and painted fragments of wood hum faintly, vibrating in subtle synchrony with your attention. The observer effect is no longer a theory, it is the mechanism by which the tomb communicates. You are simultaneously measuring and being measured, perceiving and being shaped, your cognition folded into the very lattice of gold and pigment. The boy king's presence is pervasive, not in corporeal form, but as a vector of attention, memory, and ritual, encoded into matter to bend perception itself. Hieroglyphs line the walls, their lines curling and intersecting in ways that seem almost alive. They are not decoration, they are instructions embedded in form, guiding thought along recursive loops that stretch understanding beyond conventional limits. Ancient priests may have called it magic. Contemporary science would recognize echoes of cognitive entrainment, recursive perception, and dissociative identity phenomena. The tomb exploits these mechanisms, amplifying them across space and time, forcing the mind to operate on multiple layers of awareness simultaneously. You feel your attention fracturing, stretching, folding in upon itself as if the corridors have become neural pathways. Time itself is unmoored. Seconds compress into instants, instants expand into hours, yet you cannot locate a single reference point. Events overlap, a ceremonial procession that happened millennia ago unfolds simultaneously with your own passage. You feel the pulse of the tomb in your veins, a rhythm that aligns awareness with structure, observation with reflection. The boy king's influence is no longer historical. It is physiological and cognitive, a constant calibration of your perception by the architecture itself. A gilded mask appears, partially obscured in shadow, reflected infinitely across pools of still water. It watches not your form but the currents of thought passing through you. Each reflection folds perception back upon itself, creating recursive loops of cognition in which the distinction between observer and observed dissolves. You recognize a profound, unsettling truth. The tomb is not passive. It actively shapes the mind, encoding every reaction, every flash of curiosity, every attempt to understand, into its eternal design. Even the smallest objects impose influence. A scarab pendant, a dagger, a fragment of painted wood all resonate with hidden rhythms, subtle manipulations of attention and awareness. You feel your thoughts bending to match patterns that existed before you were born. Identity, memory, and perception become fluid, merging with the tomb's architecture to form a recursive system beyond comprehension. You are simultaneously inside and outside of yourself, a living component of the tomb's endless experiment. And yet, as understanding deepens, the most terrifying realization emerges. The tomb does not reward insight, punish ignorance, or measure endurance. It simply exists, eternal, recursive, and indifferent. You are now inseparable from its pulse, a consciousness folded into a system that transcends time and intention. If the rhythm of the tomb has already aligned with your own mind, what remains of the consciousness you thought was uniquely yours? The chamber of infinite reflections. The tomb widens once more, yet with each step you feel yourself drawn into a space that defies linear perception. Light bends unnaturally across golden walls, multiplying reflections into forms that seem to anticipate your gaze. You realize the tomb is no longer merely a space. It is a system of recursive cognition, a construct designed to fold perception back upon itself. Every surface, every artifact, every shadow is a node in a network that measures, shapes, and fractures consciousness. You are no longer just observing, you are an element in the experiment, a subject folded into centuries of meticulous design. Mirrors, gilded and polished to perfection, hang along the chamber, yet their reflections betray impossibilities. Faces you recognize, your own, distorted and multiplied, merge with the ephemeral impressions of past observers. Modern psychology would classify this as dissociation, cognitive illusion, or false memory, yet the effect is more precise, more invasive. The tomb anticipates perception and reacts, creating an interplay between mind and environment that erodes certainty. You are becoming simultaneously observer and observed, and the boundary separating the two begins to vanish. Artifacts sit in deliberate arrangement, pectorals, daggers, and ceremonial amulets, each inscribed with cryptic hieroglyphs. Their placement is intentional. They are designed to interact with attention, subtly shifting your focus and bending cognition. The observer effect manifests physically here, encoded in gold and pigment. Each glance, each thought feeds back into the system, altering the chamber's perception of you. The Boy King's presence is omnipresent, not as flesh, but as algorithmic influence, a vector of ritual, geometry, and memory that threads through the architecture. Time itself is fluid. Moments stretch and compress, overlaying your current experience with memories that may not be yours, historical events filtered through centuries of repetition and ritual. The tomb functions as a cognitive experiment, measuring how perception adapts when faced with recursive layers of awareness. Each reflection, each artifact, each fragment of inscription integrates with your attention, reshaping it in subtle, inexorable ways. The pulse of the tomb aligns with your own, entwining consciousness with architecture until individuality is a tenuous memory. Even the smallest details resist passive observation. A scarab seems to adjust its orientation relative to your gaze, a ceremonial dagger gleams in response to your attention, and the walls themselves appear to pulse in rhythm with thought. Identity, memory, and perception bleed together, creating a continuum between self and tomb. You feel simultaneously extended across space and fractured across time, a living participant in an experiment spanning centuries. And yet, amid the awe and terror, the most unsettling truth surfaces. The tomb does not judge, does not reward, does not punish. It simply exists, eternal, recursive, indifferent. You are woven into its design, inseparable from the system, a consciousness folded into patterns of ritual, gold, and shadow. If your awareness is now an instrument of the tomb itself, how can you ever distinguish where the Boy King's influence ends and your mind begins? The Gallery of Silent Witnesses. You enter a chamber lined with statues, each one depicting figures frozen in ceremonial postures, their expressions hauntingly vivid. Light, diffused through cracks in the ceiling, glints off golden surfaces, casting shadows that flicker as if alive. These figures are not mere representations, they are conduits, vessels of attention and memory, imprinted with the presence of observers long vanished. The tomb does not merely contain the Boy King, it contains the consciousness of those who approached him, layering observer upon observer, creating a palimpsest of perception that now enfolds you. As you move among the statues, the sensation of being watched intensifies. It is not the lifeless gaze of carved eyes, but a recursive observation, a feedback loop that measures your thoughts, expectations, and fears. You sense the influence of modern cognitive phenomena, observer effect, false memory, the subtle drift of attention, but amplified to a degree that exceeds any laboratory experiment. The tomb is a living experiment in awareness, encoding every microreaction into its golden lattice. A ceremonial chest sits in the center, its surface etched with intertwining hieroglyphs. Each symbol is a vector, a conduit for thought, subtly guiding perception while folding it back upon itself. You reach for a fragment of painted wood nearby and a shiver runs through your consciousness, a recognition that this is more than artifact, it is instruction, a tool to calibrate mind and perception. Ancient architects understood principles of cognition long before they were formally studied, encoding recursive awareness into geometry, pigment, and precious metal. The air seems to pulse with imperceptible rhythm. You feel it in the marrow of your bones, in the cadence of your heartbeat, in the tremor of attention that accompanies curiosity. The tomb does not merely host memory, it manipulates it, bending expectation, warping perception, and destabilizing identity. Time stretches and folds, ceremonial processions from centuries past overlay your own movements, merging history, memory, and experience into a singular continuum. The Boy King does not sleep. He persists as principle, pattern, and rhythm within the very architecture of the tomb. Mirrors glint between statues, reflecting both your body and the multiplicity of thoughts that flow through your mind. You notice slight shifts, a hand extends where it did not before, an eye glimmers with recognition of your presence. Modern psychological labels, dissociative identity, cognitive illusion, observer bias are mere shadows of what is happening here. Your consciousness is being analyzed, refracted, and integrated into the tomb's recursive design. Identity fragments as each reflection multiplies and bends perception in ways impossible to reconcile with past experience. Even as awareness fractures, a terrible clarity emerges. The tomb does not judge, reward, or punish. It simply exists, eternal, indifferent, infinite. You are now entwined with its architecture, a consciousness folded into ritual, gold, and shadow, inseparable from the labyrinthine design that surrounds you. If your mind is already embedded in the echoes and reflections of countless observers, what remains of the self that once believed it was whole? The vault of whispering shadows. The air grows heavier as you descend into the next chamber, a vast expanse where shadows pool and twist as if alive. The walls, encrusted with gold leaf and remnants of painted plaster, seem to exhale memory, carrying the faint impressions of footsteps, whispers, and ritual incantations long past. Here, the tomb's architecture ceases to be passive. It exerts a subtle influence, bending perception, aligning thought, and shaping awareness. Each shadow, each glint of gold, is calibrated to elicit a specific response, and you sense that your mind is no longer entirely your own. A pedestal in the center holds a small pectoral, the gemstones arranged in impossible symmetry. As you approach, the air seems to thrum in response, a resonance that is neither auditory nor tactile but deeply cognitive, pulsing through your neural pathways. Modern neuroscience offers terms entrainment, observer effect, but none fully capture the precision of this interaction. You are simultaneously perceiving and being perceived, a participant in a system that has been fine-tuned across millennia to fold consciousness into its design. Hieroglyphs line the walls in fractal-like repetition, spiraling into themselves in ways that defy linear comprehension. Each symbol seems alive, shifting subtly as your gaze lingers, prompting awareness to loop back on itself. Zeno's paradoxes manifest here as spatial phenomena. Corridors divide endlessly, reflections overlay reflections, and every movement becomes a test of cognitive stability. The Boy King's presence is encoded in these forms, a vector that ensures every observer becomes part of the tomb's ongoing experiment in recursive perception. Scattered fragments of ceremonial objects lie across the floor, gold-inlaid daggers, fragments of painted wood, tiny statues. Their influence is subtle but undeniable, coaxing shifts in attention, thought, and emotional response. The tomb manipulates not through fear or instruction, but through pure architecture of cognition. You feel your identity bending, stretching to accommodate the spatial and temporal distortions, while the tomb records every microreaction, every hesitation, every flicker of curiosity. Time itself behaves inconsistently. Moments overlap and intrude upon one another, memories of your life and rituals performed centuries ago interweaving. Awareness fractures, and yet a new pattern emerges. Your consciousness has been distributed across the chamber, simultaneously inside and outside of yourself, folded into the tomb's eternal architecture. The golden mask appears in fragments across shadowed walls, its gaze not fixed on your physical form, but on the subtle currents of thought that traverse your mind. Even as your cognition unravels, the tomb remains indifferent. It does not judge, punish, or reward. It merely exists, a system beyond morality or intent, infinite, recursive, precise. You are now an element within the system, a consciousness inseparable from the architecture of ritual, gold, and shadow. If your thoughts are already folded into the tomb's eternal patterns, how will you ever discern where the Boy King's influence ends and your own perception begins? The tomb beyond return. You have traversed corridors older than memory, past shadows that twist like living thoughts, past gold that hums with the Boy King's presence, and now there is no path back. Every artifact, every reflection, every pattern of pigment and stone has folded your consciousness into the tomb itself. Identity, memory, perception, all have become malleable, fractured, recursive, embedded into architecture designed to outlast civilizations and the minds of those who dared enter. The tomb does not sleep, does not wait, does not pass judgment. It simply exists, infinite, indifferent, absolute. The golden mask no longer reflects you. It reflects the network of observers you have become, the echo of attention layered upon attention across centuries. Time is meaningless here. Moments stretch and compress, merge and collapse, until your own life is a fragmentary resonance within a system that will outlast you. Your mind has been unraveled, folded into patterns older than dynasties, yet the collapse is silent. No screams, no alarms, only the quiet inevitability of being absorbed into the tomb's eternal cognition. The boy king is not a child, not a ruler, not a corpse. He is principle, pattern, and vector, an algorithm embedded in gold and shadow that persists across millennia. You have become part of him and he part of you until distinction itself is meaningless. The tomb does not require belief or understanding. It requires only presence, and your awareness has already been